Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Empowered Eczema podcast. We have a very special guest today. We have Katie Mackie, otherwise known as Mackie's Moments. Thank you for joining us today.
No worries. Glad to be here.
So, we're jumping into discussing your eczema journey, what it's been like. I actually would love to hear how it started, any sort of the medications that you've used along the way, and because you kind of ended up in the influencer content creation space with it, I'd also love to hear how you got into that as well.
Oh, here we go. So yeah, I'm Katie Mackie, 27, and I've literally had eczema since birth. It was that kind of typical nappy rash that first presented, then turned out not to be nappy rash and stayed. So I've basically, yeah, had it my whole life. I think my kind of earliest memories of it is like when I was 3. I don't know if a lot of other people have these memories, but like some of my earliest memories are like screaming as I'm getting into a bath, like an oat bath. And like it's so weird, but like looking back on it, it took me a few years to realize what those memories were about. And it's actually just like speaking to my parents and mum, who's like, oh yeah, it was like your Leighton baths and your oat baths. And like, it's so sad. And when you look back and you think that some of your earliest memories are you like in pain from like getting like prescription creams put on you, as well as just having a bath. So yeah, it's been a really big up and down journey, but my skin, like it would just be very contact dermatitis, very sensitive. So I was always going up and down and getting triggered by things, but then also having periods where my skin was doing really good. But initially it was kind of like stomach, the arm bends, the leg bends, the bum. And then as I moved into being a teenager, I got really bad polypox eczema and like the kind of hand eczema and just dryness and yeah, and just every time, you're going through those kind of stages of like new things, like when you're a teenager, you try makeup, triggered. And just along the journey, I've learned a lot about myself and my skin. And the first port of call for me was always like going to the doctors, and it was always steroids. And it wasn't until I like went to uni and actually didn't live at home and finally had to look after myself that I started to think, oh, maybe there's other options other than these steroids. But like for me, it wasn't until I was 20 that I actually realized that like, there was more than just one option. And I was always just taught to go to the doctors and take the like prescriptions rather than actually learning to listen to my body. So it was a very hard journey. And the only reason why I've actually gone down the kind of natural route of it is because I ended up having alopecia at 20. And when I got alopecia, I then also was prescribed more steroids, and I was using steroids on both my scalp for my hair loss and then all over my body for the eruption of eczema, which had happened because of a stress reaction to losing my hair. And I know that in hindsight now, but at the time I was like, I'm bold, I'm flaky, and I'm 20. What's have I got going for me? And I was just really not in a great headspace and started having like panic, anxiety attacks, not anxiety attacks, panic attacks. And they just seem to have no real trigger or reason. But now I know it's loss of control and just losing control of both my hair and my skin, and just feeling like everything I was doing wasn't working. And I was actually very lucky to have met a fellow American from California in my workplace, and he was really into holistic health. And this was the first kind of time I'd come across an alternate mindset towards like, just health in general. Like I'd always just gone down the route of going to the doctors, but with speaking to him, he opened my mind towards like my diet being a trigger and stress being a factor, and it not just being like you've got a skin condition or you've got this condition. It's actually there's these triggers, and it's just really scary to think that I'd gone all that time throughout my life not knowing that like these things were things. I hope I'm making sense and I'm not just spewing, but
No, I
um
love it. Keep going.
yeah,
Keep
I
going.
will keep going. Good, good. So yeah, when I was working, I was working in a gym as a lifeguard, and my skin was awful. I was literally sitting on the poolside, like trying to hide my skin at all costs. I was wearing like long sleeves underneath my like red and yellow lifeguard uniform. I don't know if you're American, do you have the same uniform when it's lifeguarding, like the yellow and red, like the yellow t-shirts and red shorts? Or
We
is it
do
different?
not.
Oh my
No,
God.
we
Well,
just
whenever
don't.
Yeah, Google it. Like later on, Google it, and you'll see what I mean. But wearing bright yellow, bright red, and then I'd wear like leggings and long sleeves underneath, sitting on a spa poolside, so a really hot, humid environment, which obviously made everything 10 times worse. So I remember this. Uh, I can't remember his name, sadly, but I remember he was a PT and he came down and he was like, Katie, what are you doing? Why are you sitting here? Why have you covered your skin head to toe? This is not going to help the situation. And I was just like, oh, just really self-conscious about my skin. And then he was like, okay, you're going to come see me after you finish your shift and we're going to sit down. We're going to make a plan. And then I had a whole exercise plan and then a meal plan. And I was tracking my food and then trying to identify triggers. And this is when I cut dairy out because I started to correlate itching and intake of dairy. And it's like was a massive trigger for me. And then once I actually realized it, because it just took some time to actually pay attention to what I was eating and stuff. And oh my God, that made such a big difference cutting that out. But yeah, I feel like I'm not answering your question, but
You are absolutely answering my question. So you're just, continue on. At some point, you ended up being a content creator, and
yeah.
I'm actually curious if you could include as well any you've kind of described, like, you were using the steroids, and
Mhm.
then in your adulthood, you kind of opened up to this other world. In
Yeah.
your adult years, were you also using any sort of medications to help you along this journey?
That's what I forgot to answer. That's why I went off on that tangent. Got it. Okay. So, like I said, I'd had like I was going through hair loss, and I was having really bad eczema flares. So I was using steroids on both my scalp and my body. And I just got to a point where like I would feel like now in hindsight, I think it was rebound I was having to topical steroids. And I would just feel like every time I applied the steroids, they were like burning and hurting, and like they just weren't working. And my skin was getting more red, more inflamed, more sore, and it was spreading further. And at this point, I just was like, nothing's working. And also, like I said, like this was lucky at the time that this new guy had started at work who was really into holistic health, and he was like a doctor and also a PT at my work. So it was just like, the world came at the right time kind of moment where like my skin was getting awful just as the same time as like this guy opened my mind up to like holistic health and alternate routes. So I ended up doing the kind of meal plan and tracking and all that and identifying triggers, and like I went vegan for a month. And back then in like it must have been 2017, 2017. No one was like, I didn't know any vegans back then, so it was really hard to try and cut things out back then. So that was quite interesting, and that only lasted about a month because it was so hard to do back then. And also I don't think it was for me. Love me. But yeah, so I like I said, I'd started to try all these new holistic things, but at the time I was still using my steroids. It wasn't until like I then started going to therapy because of the anxiety that I was experiencing about my appearance, that I started to like really talk and unpack things. And I kind of felt like I'd gained control of my mental health. And that's when I started to be like, I can control my physical health too. Obviously, that's not always the case when it comes to eczema, because I then finally understood that stress was a trigger and you can't always control your stress levels. And like the smallest thing can cause the biggest flare. Like just takes that one little spike of cortisol and then you're like, flaring 2 weeks later or even immediately red. But yeah, so it was a really slow, like it was a long journey to getting towards like actually going down the kind of natural route, but like it all kind of started unfolding at the same time. And I stopped using steroids for maybe like, oh my God, it must have been about 6 months. And I just kind of moved away from them because I felt like I was in more control, and because I was in a better headspace and I was, exercising, I was controlling what I was eating, I felt in more control. But still, I hadn't really completely ruled them out. I didn't know what TSW was at all. I was completely unaware. So I ended up going back to them when my skin started getting worse again, because I was at uni. So when I went back home, there was all these new triggers again and a new environment. And I'm talking in hindsight now, knowing that these were the factors that caused it to go bad again. So when I moved home, I moved into my boyfriend's and he had a cat. it was pollen season. The cat loved running in the flowers, and the cat would be actually just carrying the pollen on his fur. And I love cats, so I was like stroking him all the time. And that's when my hand eczema started going mental again. So inevitably, I end up using steroids again. I even just like gone to the pharmacist, and they were still giving you over the counter, because in the UK now they don't give you over the counter steroids unless you have a prescription, which is some great change to stop people kind of overusing them on their own, and just more education as well, because it makes you think, oh, if I can't get it without a prescription, there's probably a reason. But yeah, so I ended up just using them in drips and drabs and all that, and I'm just trying to think. And then I guess about like on and off for 2 years using them in drips and drabs. And it was when I look back, my skin would flare seasonally in like pollen season, winter, and I was going through like really bad skin and like mainly my hands, like I said. And then I finally got to like it must have been COVID, like 2020. And again, I'd gone through a massive period of stress because of COVID. Like, I had to move home really suddenly from uni again. But this time it was because I was graduating, not just coming home for summer. So when I came back, I was like doing a dissertation during lockdown, and again, a big stressful period, and like lockdown in general, just stressful. Everyone thought everyone was going to die at the drop of a hat. And like, I was just away from all my family and just, terrified that I would never see them again, kind of thing. Um, Panic mindset, see, a little bit of anxiety came back out again. But yeah, so my skin started getting really bad again, and I tried to go to the doctors, but I couldn't go to the doctors because during COVID in the UK, you just couldn't get any appointments. And I was just, because I had moved back down south from Scotland, I was unregistered from a doctor, so I couldn't even get a repeat prescription. But this is the best bad thing that ever happened to me because I couldn't get the steroids. And then I just got forced into like taking things into my own hands again. And again, this is when I discovered natural skincare routes, and I discovered fixed emollients, and like, I ended up using a brand in the UK called Barman's, which is 100% natural. And they were my first ever touch point of being educated. And I didn't even know that my hand eczema wasn't just called eczema. It was actually a very specific type of eczema with and they were a godsend to me. And I will just always shout about them. They were my first ever interaction with a skincare brand who actually educated me. And they sent me links and things to read up further, and really opened my mind. And then I just became obsessed with learning about my body and what could and help me. And then I found the National Eczema Society's seal of approval list, and that was my kind of first starting point, where I looked and learned about like active ingredients and things that are potentially harmful towards people with eczema prone skin. So I cut out all my products that had methylizonate in it, or however you pronounce it. But the reason I did that is because I was like, saw it on their list, and then I went to all of my products and I was like, oh my God, it's in everything. And it was in my body wash, it was in my shampoo, it was literally in everything. And then obviously I was lathering those products into my hands, and the worst place my flares were my hands. So again, I started controlling my environment, and things started improving. And I just, on the whole, gained more control of my skin condition by going down that natural route, and actually really knowing what I was coming into contact with, and just becoming aware of even small little things, like when everything reopened, there was a lot of really harsh sanitizers being used by companies and stuff, just because they were worried about the germs. So my hands, again, when everything opened up, started going mental again. And even like my arms, like anywhere that I would touch the surface, say I was eating out or something. And I think I really learned how to listen to my body. I correlated the touching of a table or a pint glass to a flare because it was the cleaning products. So then I started using natural cleaning products, and like, oh my God, it just kind of became what I call a 360 approach towards skincare and my like life. So I would look at everything and all my touch points. And yeah, that is my kind of ins and outs of in a quick blurb.
That was fabulous. And it's cool because as someone who's had lifelong eczema as well, just hearing your journey of discovery through your whole life is so fascinating. And I'm sure so many people who are listening can relate and understand and be like, oh my God, that was me too. Or, wow, during COVID, my eczema flared too. Or, oh my God, my hand eczema and those hand sanitizers. So,
Acid. The one thing I didn't talk about was like how I ended up sharing online. So yeah, I'll talk about that bit. So after, like I said, I had done my dissertation during COVID, I really struggled to get a job. And I just felt like every time because I was trying to get a marketing job, every time I was trying to get a job, it ended up being a pyramid scheme. Like everything that was available was a pyramid scheme. And I got like into so many things where I was like, this is a con. So I just completely gave up on trying to get my like career job. And I was like, I just need to earn money. So when everything opened back up, I was like, I'm going to go work in a pub again. Like, and I'd always worked in pubs and like, health clubs before I like graduated. So I was like, I'm going to go and do that, just going to chill out, earn some money, and then take my time to find a job. But when I started working in a pub post COVID, or kind of ins and outs of COVID, again, the kind of contact environmental triggers in a pub environment during that time period, oh my God, my skin just got the worst it'd ever been in years. And I was just, my hands just got so painful and so sore. And again, I kind of realized it was the sanitizers and all the kind of contact triggers. But I also I felt that anxious voice that I'd managed to like, control and gain more control of coming back. And I was struggling more and more not to listen to the kind of little voice in my head that was saying that I've got to hide, and just constantly being negative when I look to myself and just hating what I was seeing. And it's so hard when you have hand eczema, because everything you do, you can see it, and everything you do, you can feel it. Like, it's so painful and debilitating when you get it real bad. Like, and it's just so hard to kind of not think about it because you can constantly see it. And I remember I was carrying food to tables wearing like face masks and everything. And I'd put the food down on the table. And then one time I heard someone be like, what's wrong with our hands? And everyone was terrified of getting illnesses. They thought everything was contagious and that they were going to die. So it just intensified my anxiety. And that one comment just made me so upset. I remember going to the bathroom and crying. But luckily I went with my boyfriend and I told him, and he was like, fuck them. But yeah, but it took me to then kind of realize that it's not my fault, it's a medical condition, and I can't always control that medical condition. But what I can control is how I react to it. And again, I started leaning back into the kind of therapy practices that I learned through CBT, so cognitive behavioral therapy, which kind of teaches you what you can and can't control, and also helps you calm yourself during like anxiety. So I started leaning back into those kind of practices, and that's when I started like writing little quotes and stuff. And then I just one day felt like, why am I hiding this? And I got really angry at myself, because I was just like, you know what, like, it's a medical condition, I can't control it. And it was this rage built up, and I was like kind of reflecting on my life, and like, why have you been hiding this journey? And like, why are you hiding? Like, you know what, if someone judges you, that's someone just walking themselves out, that's the trash taking itself out kind of thing. Like, and I also think like eczema kind of gives you that power where like you're like, you know what, I've just found a red flag in someone, and it's done that little job for me. I don't have to go through months of like all the pain and stuff. I can just watch them walk out the door now. But so like I said, I got really angry, and one day I posted on my main account, and I was just like, I posted this picture, and it's just like, this is my account where I pretend it's all sunshine and fluffy bunnies, but fuck it. I've been living with eczema since birth, and none of you would ever know. And I'd been editing it out of my photos and everything. I'd gone to so much effort to like hide it. And I was just like, I want to get the word in. This is me. I'm taking my control. This is my power, and this is my story. And, take it or leave it kind of thing. And I also think it helped that little anxious voice, because it was like, if I say it first, you don't get the chance to. And that's me taking my power and control. And the only other thing I did was that I made it my mission to educate anyone who said anything as well. So part of my anxiety was, what if someone says something again? I'm going to now have my little note I've written and I've memorized. I'm ready to like counteract it. I'm not going to allow them to get inside my head. I'm going to, again, educate them. So maybe in the future, someone else doesn't have to go through that same experience. And that's where the kind of fire lit and never stopped.
Yeah, thank you. That
Word vomit.
is I'm glad that you took your power back. I think it is so inspiring to hear that you took your condition where you were hiding. Funny enough, I even remember years ago when I was on YouTube before I ever started talking about eczema, and I was doing fitness videos, and I would strategically make sure, because my eczema was usually located on like the insides of my elbows and the backs of my
Yeah.
knees. And so I think I would sit there and just like hide it with camera angles, or make sure that part of my body wasn't seen or anything like that. And it was so many people, especially in real life, where they have these jobs that they need to go to, and they have I mean, I'm sure so many people relate to your lifeguarding story where you're just covering yourself head to toe in clothes. So Can you tell the listeners a little bit about how they can follow you and your journey? I think you have 2 different accounts, and kind of walk them through what they can expect from the accounts?
Yeah, so I initially Mackie's Moments used to be called like my name used to be Katie E. Mackie. And then when I had that kind of moment where I was like, fuck it, I changed my account name to Mackie's Moments because I was like, I'm gonna share all of my life moments. And that's the kind of meaning behind that account name. So it's where I kind of share my whole life. But in the last 6 months, have been having really bad skin, and, like, the first ever time where I've had, like, really bad, like, kind of allergy flares on my face and, like, extreme facial eczema. Like I said before, it'd always been in places where, like, I could strategically hide it if I felt like it, but I just balls to the walls, had no choice, and I was just, like, started really, really posting on my, like, personal account, and it's where I just kind of do a lot of eczema advocacy and just mental health awareness and just kind of a dear diary of like dear itchy people kind of thing. And it's just kind of relatable ups and downs of life. Like even today I was just saying that like my skin's completely cleared up now, touch wood, for the last month, and it's been like great. So I've been able to book the dentist because I can open my mouth again. So yeah, but I share things like that are just relatable and just my favorite products and stuff. And then on Itch and Bitch, it was created initially as like I always put it as a community page because I wanted people to come together, and I do a lot of meme content and just kind of make it humorous and try find the little light in the kind of darkness. And then also because everyone following it has a skin condition, it's so easy to connect and find people who are just like you, even just on the comment section. And it's got a really great community vibes, and just like of trying to host events and stuff. I've done like 2 now and they've both been really successful, like too successful actually. Like so it's just so many people want to come together, and it's just really beautiful. And I think that's the one thing about sharing online. Like I did it for myself, but I didn't realize how much it would help other people. And I did it with intention of like I was feeling like I was a kettle and I was over boiling. I don't know how to explain it, or like my cup was overfilled. So I just needed to tell it and let everyone know. But I just couldn't believe how many people came back being like, oh my God, I've got eczema. And then I like just have made some really great friends. And I think often the one thing you hide is the one thing connecting you to like hundreds, if not millions of others. And you'll be surprised how much positivity comes out of a really negative situation or journey. Like when you add in a little bit of personal experience and like shared experience, you'll just be amazed how much it feels like you can finally breathe and like you're understood and you don't have to over explain. So I think just in both the accounts, it's a little bit of reality.
I think your accounts are fabulous, and it reminded me of what I do with a lot of my accounts being empowered eczema and the concept of becoming empowered through the process. And it sounds like for you, finding your voice created a lot of empowerment for you. And I think that's really beautiful. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to, in the show notes, if you're listening to this, or on YouTube in the description, I'm going to have all of Katie's links so you can find her, follow her, especially if you live in the UK. She does have meetups. And so, is there any last thing you'd like to share, like one last piece of advice that you want to give the listeners?
Mm. Oh my God. One thing I will say is that like it took me a long time to realize what works for one person doesn't always work for another. And it is such a hard journey because like you can have that same diagnosis as someone else, but your experience is completely different and your triggers are completely different. So I would say don't get like disheartened if you're trying all these products and they're not working. Like the thing I had to do was trial and error. And one day you kind of, when you start flaring, you don't get like scared or upset anymore. You use it as like deja vu and you allow the kind of fear of the previous reaction to educate you moving forward. And you kind of just realize that you know what, this deja vu, although it can be terrifying, like the smallest flare, you start to think that the worst thing's going to happen again and it's going to go back to that really bad place. It can actually be like educational and inform you for the future. And each flare is a lesson kind of thing.
Each flare is a lesson. So before we end, we had talked about a quote, and I wanted to just get your thoughts on that quote. You wrote, I learned to listen to my body instead of my doctor. Just quickly elaborate, and then we will end it here.
Okay, so I feel like when I was younger and in the early years, I think it would have been a lot easier for me if I had realized and known that there was more than just one route to healing. And I always just thought that I would go to the doctors and be given something, and that would be all I needed to do. And if that wasn't working, I didn't know what else to try or do. And I went through a lot of like panic purchasing when I did finally start to realize things, and I wasted a lot of money. And I just think there's so much educational information out there, even your your Instagram page in particular, like when it comes to diet, like there's so many things to consider. And like if you're starting to think something's not working for you, like really start listening to that and start tracking things like your diet and trying to correlate. And also, if a product doesn't work, don't just spin it. Take a picture of the ingredients. And then if you get another reaction to another product, take a picture of the ingredients. And then you start to be able to find a common denominator in your triggers. And long term, this is what's going to help you learn to manage your skin, because eczema isn't about finding the cure. It's about learning how to live more comfortably and how to manage it. Whereas I feel like a lot of people are looking for this before and after, when it's a long-term management condition, not a before and after. And there's lots of little things you can do along your journey to make your life more comfortable. Because one of my favorite quotes is, when you feel more comfortable, you feel more confident, and you can really start living instead of just suffering.
Oh, I love that. Well, thank you so much for coming on to this podcast. And again, every information about Katie will be in the show notes or the YouTube description. So thanks for coming in today.
No worries. Thank you for having me.
All right, everyone. Bye. Take care.
Bye.